Okay, we are off and running. Here's our first writing lesson. As I said before, SAQs are pretty straightforward, so this isn't too complicated. I think you guys will do fine with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to do one, and then I'm going to give you a question that should be really manageable based on what we've done so far this year. Okay. So first of all, this is Herodotus. Whenever we do writing lessons, we kind of use this theme of Herodotus. He's the first to write history like we do. He was the first, over 2,000 years ago, this Greek guy, he was the first to look to see how history is connected. So this is like a famous introduction to his history book where he says, like, my history is my showing forth of my inquiry. And what he's saying is, like, I studied this, this topic of this war, this great war, and what you see before you is the product of my inquiry, why we went to war. So he, as a historian, he's saying, look, I looked at all this stuff. In this question, in this issue, it was a causal question. Why did we go to war? And now he's like throwing his history book at you, saying, this is what I think. So you're doing the same thing when you're writing history. It's a showing forth of your inquiry. And it just so happens that inquiry is the Greek word for history. So history is a process of inquiry. All right, now that you're properly inspired, let's take a look at what an SAQ is. So an SAQ is the second part of the exam that you're going to take in May, and it's you have 40 minutes to answer 3 questions, and the 3 questions, they each have 3 parts, and they're scored with 3 points on the exam. What they're looking for here is specific evidence. Obviously, it has to be accurate, but they want. I mean, it's actually a mix of your broad statements, but they want specific evidence in there. So a mix of broad and specific. But the key is you can't just write in vague terms. They're going to want to see the goods. Next, there's no thesis. You don't have to connect between the 3 parts. This is just like raw, straightforward knowledge. This is what I know. And you have to write for each of the 3 parts. You write basically 2 to 3 complete sentences, and you're going to be good to go. Clear, you just write clear, straightforward. That's it. So this is a good writing lesson to start with. It's not some of the essays that you write. There's a little more to it. This is just raw, straightforward. This is what I know. There are 4 types of SAQs. The first one is what we call dueling historians, and that is where they show 2 historians, different views on things, kind of like what we did yesterday. The second kind is a primary source or sources. They'll give you like an excerpt from a speech or a cartoon, sometimes 2, and they have you make sense of those. The third category is a graph, map, or chart. And the fourth one is a historical thinking skill is highlighted. And we're going to do that today. Today's is comparison. We're going to look at. There's no prompt, meaning there's no map or there's no speech or anything. It's just a question. So these are the 4 types of SAQs that you'll encounter. By the way, feel free to have our substitute pause this, and this is on Google Classroom for your reference if you want to review this stuff. So here's an example of one of the dueling historians. So kind of like what we did yesterday, you have 2 historians with very different views on capitalism in the late 1800s. And so then the College Board is going to ask you questions. They want to know, hey, what's the difference between these interpretations? And then B is, hey, can you give us some evidence that would support, historian A? And then how about some evidence that supports historian B? So that's basically what we have here. We'll work with these more. You're not doing this one today, but I just thought I'd show you what one looks like. So here's some insider tips. I graded some of these SAQs for the College Board a couple years ago, and here's what I learned in the training. That the first one is that you have to show specific knowledge. So I've already said that, but that's a big deal. You can kind of separate the ones who are just students who are talking in general. And so here's some great examples of this. So one student who responds to a question about immigration in the antebellum period, that means before the Civil War, this student said, immigrants came to the United States to get jobs. It's not an untrue statement, but we need more specific discussion. So here's, if it was something like this: Irish immigrants escaping the potato famine came to the United States to get jobs. Then we have some specificity in there. So it doesn't take much, but we just need to see some reason why they're coming in. Oh, here's one reason: potato famine. So insider tip number 2: what's the difference between identify and explain? So these prompts, or the questions, ask you to explain, and identify would be, if you list a law, but explain means you explain how it's relevant. So identify is just like, okay, here's a law, or okay, here's a cause, but you also need to explain it. You can't just drop, terms. You have to, discuss it, explain the connections, or explain how this works. Tip 3: there's a little bit of an SAQ formula. It doesn't work for every SAQ, but this will work for a lot of them. In sentence 1, answer the question with specific evidence. Sentence 2, or maybe you write 3 sentences, but then you're just going to expound on that. Just like you've been taught in English for years, you have to explain your reasoning a bit. So here's an example. Let's say that there's an SAQ, and it's asking for evidence that contradicts the Hakluyt's optimistic view of the New World. So remember the Hakluyts, Richard Hakluyt and his cousin Richard Hakluyt. They're talking about how great the New World is, and in this one policy paper, they talk about how the New World is like the Garden of Eden. There's all this stuff there that people can get, that can be self-sufficient, etc. So let's say that one of the SAQ parts is asking for evidence that contradicts the Hakluyt's optimistic view of the New World. So here's what this savvy student wrote: the early experience of Jamestown totally contradicts the Hakluyt's optimistic view of the New World. So note back here, this student is answering the question with specific evidence right away. Boom, Jamestown. And then in one sentence says, finding no gold, failing to grow, secure enough food, the Jamestown settlers were subject to the starving time, when most died, and even some resorted to gulp cannibalism. So that, right? So here it is. Direct answer, and then they explain it a little bit. That's all you need to do. All right. So what are your takeaways? So, pause this maybe for a couple minutes and do that. Pretend like these black words aren't here. I'm just looking for your takeaways overall of what you learned here. So this is a good time to pause it, and then come back, play this again, because we're going to go over what your question is to write to today. All right, now that this has been paused, here is your SAQ. So you have time today to work on this, and it's going to be due Monday. So if you don't finish, it's due Monday. Ignore this little A part. I have to X that out. I'm going fast here, so I can go pick up my son. So anyway, so you try it. So here's the question. You can take a picture of it if that helps, but this is posted on Google Classroom. So that's it. So that's your SAQ How-To. So when you do this, you're going to do this, and then we're going to talk about it on Monday, and I'm even going to show you some student samples to see how yours compares. So give it a shot. Try to do it, try to do it in 10 or 15 minutes. And you can use your notes, or not. Well, don't use your content notes about like what you know about the Spanish and English. Try to do it without those. But you can use your notes on how to do an SAQ. Try that. All right, good luck. I'll see you on Monday.